I have never been afraid of an armed man. In war, men fall. They bleed, they die. But that night, in Donetsk, I discovered that there is something that does none of those three things. And that is why I still wake up in the middle of the night with the metallic taste of gunpowder in my throat. I was the leader of Team Alpha, 6 men, all trained, all accustomed to killing and seeing death up close. But nothing trained us for what was standing in the center of that street. Snow covering the scorched asphalt. Silence. Not the normal post-combat silence, but a silence that seemed to wait. And there, motionless, like a human lamppost in the dark, was a man. Or at least he looked like one. The thermal sight captured mass, but no heat. No breath. No thermal variation. Just form. I said fire, and that was when my world stopped making sense. If I die before I finish speaking, I hope this reaches someone who can believe what I saw. The impossible revelation that breaks the logic of combat. I heard the shot before I felt the recoil. Anton fired first. Center mass. A clean shot. Direct. Perfect. Any man would have fallen backward, spilled a lung, spat blood. But that body only took one step back. As low. Heavy step. Almost disinterested. The second burst came automatically. Like machine drill training. Head. Shoulder. Knee. The aim was perfect. I swear to God. We saw fragments of what should have been bone scattering across the snow. But he remained there. Standing. Looking at us, or perhaps just existing. And then the impossible happened. The creature tilted its head. Not like a human, but as if it were testing the angle of its own neck. A dry crack, a rotation that was too slow. Like a curious animal, as if it wanted to understand why it wasn't falling. And it was only in that instant that I realized. We were not fighting someone who could die. The enemy simply retreated to the side. Limping. Punctures all over the body, and yet still alive. When he turned the corner, he left behind a thick, black trail. Not blood, not human. Yuri knelt to collect the substance. It was the last rational decision of that night. And there you go, my friend. You can already feel that what happened on that street wasn't a common combat, right? If this mystery has already grabbed you, don't forget to strengthen the channel. Click the subscribe button and leave your like. It helps me a lot to keep bringing these accounts that the world tries to hide. Activate the bell too, because here the truth always appears in the dark. I served in the eastern sector of Donetsk. Winter of 2017. Everything smelled of burnt metal and damp concrete. The government said that area was almost stabilized. But those who walked the streets knew that stabilization. There was only a temporary absence of explosions. The war had no end, only pauses. Team Alpha, under my command, was responsible for urban sweeps, not offensive advances. If we heard footsteps, if we saw light, if something breathed in the fog, we eliminated or reported it. Direct order, no captures, no curiosity. It was about surviving, not understanding. Accompanying me were men I trusted. Yuri, a trained chemist but too young to believe in his own invincibility. Anton and Mikhail, who went ahead with predator eyes, always hunting for something even before seeing it. Victor and Sarita, silent as stone, veterans who didn't tremble even at the sound of artillery. And me, Sergeant Pavel Vinchenko, 23 years of service, 3 countries for Upenskovs. Our mission that night was too simple to justify what would come after. Patrolling an abandoned avenue, verifying isolated human movement, and returning to the point of origin. None of us imagined we would find something that refused to be human. When people think of Team Alpha, they imagine a group of combat machines, cold, automated. It wasn't that. They were men, and men always carry things that don't fit in a tactical backpack. Yuri, for example, talked too much, not because he was annoying, but because he was afraid of the silence. He always mentioned his younger sister, who lived with their mother in Kharkiv, and said that if he got out of there alive, he was going to study real chemistry in a clean laboratory, without the smell of gunpowder. He walked with a silly keychain hanging from his backpack, a miniature doll in a military uniform. That swung with every step. At first, I told him to take it off. Later, I started using that sound as a way to know he was still there behind me. Anton had that smile of someone who had crossed the limits a long time ago. He smoked in secret, even knowing the smell could give away our position. If a bullet finds me because of this, let it come with style, he would say. Mikhail was the opposite. He wrote everything down in a crumpled notebook. Time, wind direction, noises heard. It made no sense to keep records in war, but that gave him an illusion of control. Victor had a slow, heavy gait, as if he carried more deaths than equipment. He didn't talk about family. He didn't talk about the past. He hardly talked at all. But sometimes, when the radio went silent for too long, I saw him moving his fingers as if he were counting something. No one asked what. Sereda, finally, was the one who still knew how to laugh. In the early morning, when the cold cut through the skin, he would invent absurd stories about opening a bar in some random place, far from there, where only veterans would be served. He said it as a joke, but the way he looked at the ground afterward showed that, deep down, he wanted that bar more than any meal. And me, I was the guy who said move, shoot, stop, shut up, stay alive. A leader doesn't have the luxury of talking about fear, but that night, as we crossed the frozen street, I felt something in my men that I didn't admit out loud. It wasn't just tiredness. It was something that had been growing in the shadows of the previous days, as if the city were watching us back. It's bizarre to think that these men, with all their dreams and fears, were about to face the impossible. Did you also feel that weight on Pavel's shoulders? Comment below what you're thinking of this team's dynamics. I love reading your perceptions of the details of each soldier. The street seemed dead, but not empty, as if it were breathing beneath the concrete. Fine snow blew in short gusts, pushed by a wind that sounded like a metallic wire passing over the edge of a knife. That kind of cold that doesn't bite you, it watches you. Ahead, broken lights reflected in glass shards, creating the impression of movements that didn't exist. Or maybe existed too much. Nothing moved. No silhouette. No civilian. No animal. Not even rats, which normally roamed like owners of the ruins. This was the first warning. Everything was too quiet to be natural. The radio crackled with a short hiss, but no message came through. We tried contacting the rear. Clear frequency. Too clear. To safe. Silence like that is never safety. It's a wait. Anton raised his rifle slowly, as if sensing something we couldn't yet see. Mikhail wrote in his notebook, 2. 17H. No noise for 11 minutes. I remember this because to this day, when I close my eyes, I see that note as if it were engraved on my arm. Yuri stopped in the middle of the street and turned his face like someone listening to something. But there was nothing. No sound. No snap. Not even the wind. He simply said, "Sergeant, the city is breathing." No one laughed. No one replied. And that's when I realized The strangeness wasn't an event. It was a feeling, slow, crawling, as if an invisible weight had descended from the rooftops and settled on our backs. Something was there before it appeared. Something was watching. We just didn't know where. We walked 40 more meters in a dispersed formation. Our steps sank into the dirty snow with a sound that was too muffled, as if the ground were covered in cotton rather than ice. It was Yuri who noticed first. He always noticed first. He pointed to a partially destroyed building on the right and made a signal for a silence with a gloved finger. No one spoke. No one breathed loudly. On the 3rd floor, behind a broken window, there was something. Not light, not movement, but a contour, as if someone was standing there, just watching. I aimed. Anton aimed. Nothing. The silhouette didn't move, and when I tried to adjust the scope's focus, I realized what made my stomach turn. The form produced no heat at all. It wasn't alive. Or it wasn't alive in the way we understand it. Mikhail swallowed hard and wrote in his notebook. Yes, even there. You could hear the pencil scratching because the whole world was mute. And then, suddenly, the figure vanished. It didn't move to the side. It didn't duck. It vanished, as if it had never been there. Sereda held his breath and, in a low voice, asked, "Did you see that, Pavel?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to believe it was a reflection, a shadow, vapor, any natural crap. But it wasn't. And the worst part is that when we advanced to the building's entrance, there were footprints in the snow leading to the door. Human footprints. But none leading out. We found no one inside. No body. No thermal source. Only a perfect, organized void. Like a place that had been emptied 5 minutes before our arrival. The sensation was clear and inevitable. We weren't looking for the enemy. We were being led to him. We entered the next intersection. That was where everything that seemed implied became real. Visible, physical, undeniable. The street was a corridor of collapsed buildings, twisted poles, and charred cars. The snow reflected the faint glow of a dull moon, as if the sky were trying to hide what was about to happen there. Then we saw him, standing in the center of the avenue, completely exposed. A man, or something trying to be one, static, postured to upright, shoulders aligned as if the body had been assembled and not grown. The skin looked like wet leather stretched over muscle, too dark to be living flesh and yet pulsing in specific points, as if small waves were running through its veins from the inside out. Yuri breathed deeply, and his voice came out like frightened steam. "Sergeant, he's looking at us." But the creature had no movement in its face. No blinking, no muscle contraction, nothing to suggest consciousness. And yet, I knew it was watching us. Not with eyes, with presence. The same way predators know where you are in the dark, even without seeing you. Anton raised his rifle, and then the phenomenon happened. The supposed man tilted his head to the side, like someone trying to imitate a human gesture and not understanding the meaning. The neck made an audible crack, but the creature showed no pain. The torso rotated at an impossible angle, as if the spine were rubber. The legs, rigid, seemed to support the body only by habit, not by biomechanics. And in that instant, what I thought was an isolated insurgent became something completely different. It wasn't a someone. It was a something. The kind of presence that none of us had the vocabulary to describe. I knew that if I pulled the trigger, there would be no turning back. But I also knew that not shooting meant dying with questions. My finger touched the trigger. The creature took the first step, and in that step, I realized that it did not obey gravity, or the body. It obeyed only intention. Nothing else in that world made sense. When the first step of that thing touched the asphalt, something broke inside the team. And it wasn't discipline. It was instinct. Before any order from me, our bodies reacted on their own. Yuri backed up to steps, stumbled, and stood up without noticing his knee was shaking. Mikhail, who always noted everything, dropped his notebook without even noticing he was doing it. The sound of the paper falling was louder than the breathing of 6 armed men. It's strange to remember that a piece of paper on the ground made more noise than the entire war around us. Anton pointed his rifle, but he hesitated. His finger wouldn't obey. It was as if the brain said shoot, and the hand replied, I don't want to understand what I'm seeing. Sereda held his breath for so long his face turned purple, as if he inhaled, he might pull the creature into his lungs. And me, I didn't tremble, only because I was beyond fear. I commanded, but my voice came up then, small. The kind of voice that makes a soldier sound like a boy hiding in the dark. Fire. The burst cut through the silence like a saw through bone. Shots scattered across the target's body, chest, ribs, stomach. Fragments jumped in the dark like pieces of old meat. But there was no natural recoil. The enemy simply absorbed the impacts, as if the bullet was something the body recognized, accepted and ignored. Yuri gagged, not with blood, with his own breath. The air became thick, heavy, electric. Every shot that didn't drop that body made the mind understand, too slowly, that it couldn't be alive. But it wasn't dead either. Anton lowered his weapon, not for lack of ammunition, for lack of sense. And I saw in their eyes something that shouldn't exist in veteran soldiers, the urge to run without looking back. There is a limit where the brain stops trying to understand and simply accepts that it has lost control. That was the point we reached, not because the creature was strong, but because it didn't obey the rules of life. It should have been down. It should have been bleeding red. It should have been dead, but it remained standing, even with its chest open and its face partially dissolved like meat left in the sun. The jaw hung low, but there was no pain in its gaze, because there was no gaze, only a dull darkness, as if something behind the skull were piloting that body, testing its limits. Mikhail began to laugh. A short, nervous laugh, like an inverted sob. The laugh of someone who understood too much and too late. Anton dropped his magazine on the ground and began to pray. Words jumbled together, not like someone who believes, but like someone who begs. Victor took 2 steps back, raised his rifle again, and pointed it not at the enemy, but at his own chin. I had to act, scream, push, and wrench the weapon from his hand. He looked at me with hollow eyes, as if he were asking me to let him go. He wanted to die before understanding what he was seeing. Sereda, the one who always laughed at everything, was white. Not white with fear, wet with absence. The creature took 2 more steps, without sound, without hesitation. Each step was a sentence. Each step killed a little of our sanity. I tried to find logic. I tried to remember physics, ballistics, anatomy, any science to save me. But there was no science there. There was only that. 6 of us and something that shouldn't exist. Yuri fell to his knees. He began to cry, silent, childlike, as if he had returned to some place before the war, before the pain, before adult life, and wanted to wake up from that nightmare. I felt my stomach rise and lock in my throat, as if my body were trying to expel reality. War never gave me nausea. That did. And it was in that moment that I realized we were no longer in combat. We were under observation. We weren't the hunters. We were prey waiting to understand the predator. The first projectile that crossed that thing's thorax should have spilled blood. We all know that. But when it finally began to retreat, limping, only then did we notice something leaking from inside the body. It wasn't red. It wasn't just dark because of the light. It was black, thick as crude oil. Too dense to run, too heavy to drip like human fluid. The creature turned its body slowly, almost lazily, as if gravity were not its priority. No urgency, no haste. It simply walked away, even with a part of its rib showing, exposing flesh that didn't look like flesh. It looked more like living rubber, throbbing irregularly as if trying to reorganize itself. And with every step it took, the black liquid fell into the snow and spread like ink. But what destroyed us for good wasn't the blood itself. It was what happened when Yuri approached. He knelt and held out the collection vial. Standard procedure. Collection of biological fluid. Subsequent analysis. He was trembling, but he made the right move. Professional. And then, when the first drop fell inside the transparent container, we saw it happen. The liquid rose up the internal walls of the tube, defying gravity, as if it were trying to escape. Or worse, trying to reach Yuri's finger. He recoiled, startled, but didn't let go of the vial until something even more impossible happened before us. The substance moved on its own, as if it had a will of its own. It pulsed. It expanded. It sought contact. It was like watching a heart beating without a body. An independent organism trying to decide on its next host. Yuri gagged. I swear I could see the panic crossing his iris. It wasn't disgust. It wasn't common fear. It was recognition, as if he felt, deep down, that thing knew who he was. When the drop touched his glove, it adhered instantly, spreading like liquid fingers searching for an entrance. Yuri screamed, dropped the vial, but it was too late. The thing was already climbing the fabric, moving toward his wrist. Anton tried to pull it off. Sereda tried to wipe it away, but the more we touched it, the faster the liquid moved. I only had one way out. I could only do one thing. I pulled my knife and cut the fabric of the glove before the fluid reached his exposed skin. And even so, for a second, I saw a thin, living line trying to reach his flesh, as if that substance were hungry. The container continued moving on the ground, slowly, like a formless animal alive. Independent, intelligent enough to search for a body. That's when we understood. The creature didn't need to survive to continue existing. Its blood was already a complete entity. We returned carrying Yuri, still in shock, still looking at his own hand as if it no longer belonged to him. The cut on the glove saved him, but it left the feeling that something had tried to get him, as if his body had been invited to be used from the inside. None of us spoke on the way back. There was nothing to say. There was no language for that. When we arrived at the forward post, still dirty with black blood and snow, we were met not by our own company, but by men who wore no insignias, carried no identification, didn't speak Russian. They spoke clean, fluid English, too polished for war. They didn't ask what we saw. They ordered us to hand over our weapons. Then, they split us into separate rooms, as if we were contaminated. The room where I stayed was small, metallic, cold. The bulb flickered like a dying heart, and the sound of the air itself seemed to echo alone. 3 men entered. None of them introduced themselves. They didn't ask who shot. They asked how many times. They didn't ask what the creature was. They asked if it responded verbally. One of them held the vial that Yuri tried to collect. Inside it, The substance was still moving, slow, but alive, as if it were sleeping and dreaming of a body to inhabit. The man watched, noted something on a sheet without a footer, then asked, "Did it try to touch any of you directly?" I told the truth, and I felt the instant I spoke that I should have lied. That was where things changed. They didn't comment on emotion. They just noted it, coldly, clinically. Afterward, they placed a document on the table. It wasn't a contract. It wasn't a report. It was a sentence of silence. I signed because I wanted to leave. I signed because I wanted to sleep. I signed because I thought I could forget. But what came after made it clear that forgetting was not an option. When they finally gathered the team again, one man was missing. Victor was no longer among us. No one explained. No one asked. Silence was imposed, but fear was voluntary. The next day, when the grey sun finally tore through the sky, the place where we found the creature no longer existed. Not like before. The entire area, 3 full blocks, had been surrounded by metallic barriers and yellow tape, marked with symbols I had never seen in Ukrainian protocols. There were trucks without flags, helicopters without identification, soldiers who weren't soldiers because they didn't carry the weight in their eyes that we carried. No one allowed our approach. No one recognized our ranks. No one answered questions. Only 3 phrases were repeated like a mantra. Classified area. You saw nothing. Withdraw. The bodies fallen in the street, the shards, the bullet marks. Everything was removed with surgical precision. Even the ground where the black blood had fallen was cut into slabs, as if the concrete were contaminated tissue. Yuri stood watching that operation with red eyes, without blinking. He knew, perhaps before all of us, that would never be recorded officially. None of it would be admitted by the army, by the government, by anyone. When we returned to the post, our personal files were erased. Helmet recordings gone. Radio reports overwritten. Mikhail's notes confiscated. Even his notebook. Even the soft sound of the pencil scratching. It never happened again. We received a new report to sign, a document that was too clean, saying that on that night there was no adversary contact. No insurgents, no combat, no injuries. The lie was so absurd it seemed like a joke, but no one laughed. We accepted it because there was nothing to contest, and because, deep down, we knew that trying to expose that would only have one end, dying as if we had never existed. Victor never returned. No official communication. No recorded casualty. He simply ceased to be real, and while the world continued, we were left with the only truth they couldn't erase. The enemy did not die. It doesn't know how to die. It only changes shape. And we were the witnesses who lived long enough to remember. Sometimes I tried to believe that it was a collective delusion, that the mind gave in to the cold, the hunger, the stress of war. But delusion doesn't leave a mark on concrete. Delusion doesn't vanish real men. Delusion doesn't try to climb up someone's skin. I remember the sound of Yuri's breathing when the liquid touched his glove. I remember Mikhail's broken laugh. I remember Victor's hollow gaze before the disappearance. And, above all, I remember the exact moment I fired and realized that bullets were words blown into the wind. This is the kind of memory that doesn't go away with sleep or with alcohol. It moves like that substance inside the vial. It lives in me. It breathes with me. Sometimes I wake up with the sensation that something is watching me from the dark corner of the room. I don't see it, but I feel it. The same way I felt it on that street in Ukraine. And when the silence gets too heavy, almost solid, I am certain, what was there never went away. It's just waiting. Maybe it's looking for a new host. Maybe it's in someone now. Maybe it's in me. I don't know if I should have told this. Maybe I'm just moving up my sentence. But if this account reaches you, whoever you are, remember, the enemy that doesn't die isn't a story. It's a warning. We are not spectators. We are the next in line. This story ends here with Pavel's account, but the warning remains. Be careful with what you observe in the dark. You know, family. I read absolutely all the comments you leave, and this exchange is what makes the channel grow. Tell me, from where are you listening to this account? Tell me your country, your state, and your city. I want to know how far our community is reaching. And if you know or have lived through any real horror story, leave your suggestion here in the comments. Who knows, it might become the theme of the next video. Don't leave the channel just yet. Take the chance and watch the other videos appearing on the screen right now. Each story here is unique, edited in isolation with all the care to capture this heavy atmosphere of each account. Thanks for everything, truly. And I'll see you in the next video.